right, now let's go ahead and get into Punisher issue number 3. So our creative team hasn't changed, I don't believe. Looks like it is Mike Barron scripting, Klaus Janson on art and color, and Ken Bruzenak on letters. The title of the story is The Devil Came from Kansas. Our main villain here for this issue is Colonel Joseph Fryer, a retired Army officer and the leader of an extremist organization known as the New American Revolution. At first glance, Fryer appears respectable enough. He operates a real estate business in the small town of Sherrill, Kansas, and presents himself as a successful businessman and community member. But beneath that public image is a man consumed by hatred and convinced that America is under attack from forces he blames on minorities, immigrants, and Jewish people. Fryer finances his organization through violent bank robberies and dreams of building what he calls a new America. Unlike many Punisher villains who are motivated by greed or personal gain, Fryer is driven by ideology. And that's what makes him dangerous. He genuinely believes he's fighting for a cause, even as he murders innocent people and terrorizes communities. In many ways, Fryer functions more as a symbol than a deeply developed character. He's less a person and more a representation of extremist thinking. His purpose in the story is to give Frank Castle an enemy whose motivations are very different from the mobsters and street criminals we've seen so far. Speaking of the New American Revolution, this is the paramilitary organization led by Colonel Fryer. This group is made up of armed followers who share Fryer's extremist beliefs and are willing to commit violence in support of the cause. They're organized, disciplined, and equipped with military-style tactics. We see them coordinating robberies, setting up ambushes, deploying snipers, and communicating through radio networks. What makes this group stand out is that they're not portrayed as a traditional crime syndicate. They're criminals, certainly, but they see themselves as soldiers fighting a political and ideological war. Their bank robberies aren't just about money. They're meant to fund what they believe will be a future revolution. For Frank Castle, none of that matters. Whether someone robs a bank for profit or ideology, they're still criminals. That clash of viewpoints becomes one of the central themes of the issue. One minor but memorable character is the sniper Frank encounters in the woods after the highway chase. This member of the New American Revolution serves as Frank's first real source of information about Colonel Fryer. After Frank clearly disables him using a blow dart and captures him, the sniper quickly gives up his leader's identity and location. The character isn't around long, but he plays an important role in moving the plot forward. Without him, Frank never learns about Sherrill, Kansas, or Colonel Fryer's operation. Another small but important character is the unnamed realtor Frank initially visits in Missouri. His appearance is brief, but he serves two purposes. First, he helps establish Frank's attempt to step away from the constant violence by looking at property and considering a more permanent base of operations. Second, he becomes one of the innocent civilians caught in the middle of the bank robbery, prompting Frank to jump into action. The realtor's presence reinforces an idea that comes up several times in early Punisher stories. No matter where Frank goes or what he's trying to do, trouble seems to find him. Aside from Frank himself, the issue really belongs to Colonel Joseph Fryer. While he may not be the most complex villain we've seen, he gives the story a different flavor than a typical mobster or drug dealer. His extremist ideology provides the backdrop for the issue, and his confrontation with Frank allows the book to briefly explore the difference between Fryer's hatred of groups of people and Frank's singular obsession with punishing criminals. For a one-and-done villain, Fryer serves his purpose well. He's someone the reader immediately understands, immediately dislikes, and immediately wants to see Frank take down. And I'll go ahead and read the synopsis of the story, and then we'll kind of get into my thoughts on the issue here. Oh, by the way, our cover here, Frank is pulled up alongside a red truck. There's like 3 guys in there. We got the driver and 2 people, one guy hanging out in the back and another one hanging out the window of the passenger side. And they're trying to shoot Frank. Frank's trying to drive, and he's got his gun pointed at them. One guy has thrown a grenade towards Frank. So the Punisher number 3, The Devil Came from Kansas, follows Frank Castle as he stumbles onto a bank robbery in a small Missouri town, quickly realizing the criminals are part of a larger organized extremist group. After a high-speed chase involving a deadly ambush that destroys a police car, Frank tracks the group through intercepted radio chatter, taking out a sniper and learning about their leader, Colonel Joseph Fryer, who is orchestrating racially motivated robberies to fund a so-called New American Revolution. Destroying his own battle van to avoid detection, Frank travels to Kansas, infiltrates Fryer's operation under the guise of a potential ally, and confirms the group's ideology firsthand. When his cover is blown, a brutal firefight ensues, leaving Frank wounded but relentless. Using quick thinking and the environment to his advantage, he rigs a trail of fuel and ignites it, ultimately burning Fryer alive, closing the issue with a grim reminder that, in Frank's eyes, ideological hatred and violent crime are one and the same, and both are met with uncompromising punishment. Okay, so my thoughts here. The biggest thing that stood out to me, that this issue feels very comfortable. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I also don't necessarily mean it as high praise, though, either. It feels like a formula issue. Like if you were to sit down and say, what's a Punisher story? This is kind of it. You know, Frank is trying to lay low. He stumbles into a situation, immediately assesses it, gets involved, escalates things, infiltrates the bad guys. And then we get that brutal, very Punisher-style resolution at the end. It hits all the beats you expect. But the flip side of that is it doesn't really feel like it builds off the first two issues. Issue 1 and 2 felt like they were establishing something, maybe giving us a bit more insight into Frank, his past, his mindset. Here it feels more like we've shifted into, okay, this is what the book's going to be. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just noticeable this early. One thing I did like is how quickly the issue gets moving. I mean, Frank is in a real estate office, just trying to settle down, get a place, at least set up some kind of base. And within a page or two, boom, bank robbery. He's already suited up, already in the van, already in pursuit. There's no wasted time. And I think for a comic like this, especially in this era, that works. And the action itself, I didn't have any problem following that. The car chase, the sniper scene, final confrontation, all of that really feels clean. It's easy to track. Klaus Janson does a solid job making sure you always know where everyone is and what's happening, which is huge in a book that leans this heavily on action. Now, when it comes to the villains, this is where things get interesting for me. Colonel Joseph Fryer. He's not really a character so much as he is an idea. He represents the extremist ideology, this paramilitary white supremacist group funding their operations through bank robberies. And I think the book does a good job of making that feel grounded. Uncomfortable, yeah, but believable within the world it's presenting. But at the same time, Fryer himself, he doesn't feel all that distinct outside of what he represents. If you strip away the ideology, he's kind of just another guy for Frank to take down. So in that sense, the ideology matters more than the villain. And I'm not sure if that's a strength or a weakness, really. It works for the story being told here, but it doesn't necessarily make Fryer memorable as an individual. What I did find interesting, though, is the comparison the book tries to draw between Fryer and Frank. There's a moment where Frank basically says, the way you feel about those people, speaking about Jews and African Americans, he says, that's the way I feel about criminals. That's kind of a loaded statement when you look at it. The book doesn't really dive deep into it. It just kind of drops it there and keeps moving, but there's something there, because when you start thinking about it, Frank's worldview isn't exactly flexible. He has his code, and he applies it absolutely. And while the book clearly positions him as being in the right, there's a little bit of discomfort if you sit down with that comparison too long. So I like that it was there, even if it wasn't fully explored. Another thing I want to touch on is the undercover aspect. Frank pretending to be a sympathetic, playing into Fryer's worldview to gain his trust. That stuff kind of works. It's some of the more engaging material in the issue, but I did have this thought while reading it. If they keep going back to this well, it might feel a little repetitive after a bit. It works here, but it's going to be something to keep an eye on. Now let's talk about the battle van, because this is kind of funny to me. Frank destroys it, blows it up, and on paper that should be a huge moment to me. He even says it cost him $500,000, and that's not nothing. But the way it's presented, it doesn't really land with a lot of weight. And I think the reason is simple. The book really hasn't started to treat the van like a big deal yet. and hasn't been built up as this essential part of his arsenal or identity. So when it goes, it's more like, oh, okay, well, call Microchip, he'll set me up with another one. Now, if you're coming into this with the knowledge of the Punisher as a character, you might expect that to hit harder, but within the context of this series at this point, it just doesn't. As for the pacing overall, yeah, it's a little quick, but I didn't feel like it hurt the issue. This isn't really a slow, introspective story. It's meant to move, and it does. You just get enough of Frank's internal monologue to remind you what's going on in his head, but it's definitely more action-focused than the previous 2 issues. And then we get to the ending. Frank takes Fryer out in a very Punisher way. Sets up the fuel, lights it, and lets the guy burn. And then, of course, we get the line, the dark humor, the extra crispy bit. This is how we end the issue, is this guy on fire. And Frank's thinking to himself, now he's a real colonel, a southern fried colonel. They say those fryers cook up best. I like mine extra crispy. I'll be honest, I liked it. It does make the moment feel a little more like a punchline than a big thematic statement, but that's kind of who Frank is sometimes. He's got that dark, almost grimly sarcastic sense of humor, and that comes as part of the package. So for me, it worked. So overall, where did I land on the issue? I think it's solid. I think it's well executed. The action is clear. The premise is grounded. The villain serves the story. But it also feels very much like a by-the-numbers Punisher story. It doesn't really elevate things. It doesn't really deepen the character in a significant way. It's a kind of issue where if this is what the series is going to be moving forward, you kind of know what you're getting. And that can be a good thing. But it also runs the risk of becoming repetitive if they don't find ways to mix it up. So yeah, on par with the first 2 issues for me. Not better, not worse, just another solid entry that's helping define what this book is going to be.